Dr. Ben Rein joins us today on the Zaddy Zone. G'day, mate.
Good morning. How you doing? I don't actually know what time it is there, but
Well, I'm
so
in LA. You're in Stanford?
oh yeah, okay. So we're both at the same time. So good morning.
Yeah. Good morning. And are you at Stanford at the university, like right now, or
Yeah.
you live? Okay, cool.
Well, I'm at home now, but yeah, I work at university, Stanford University.
And so you're there 5 days a week?
Yeah, I kind of make my own hours, so I get to do like whatever I want. This morning I'm at home, but I'm going in later. Got to do some experiments.
Like, what are you doing?
Well, I'm studying MDMA, also known as ecstasy or Molly. I'm
Yes.
studying sort of what it does in the brain, so I do, but it's all in mice. The research that I do, 'cause we're trying to figure out like straight up circuit mechanism stuff, like basic level what happens in the brain.
Right. So, like, there's a bunch of mice at your work that are just chewing their faces off, telling each other they love each other.
Pretty much, yeah. It's funny actually. The the part of MDMA that we're interested in, or at least what I'm interested in, is like why it makes people, like you said, love each other, like why it makes people feel so connected and just
Mm,
like it's specifically empathic, or
yeah.
just in another sense connected, feeling like kind of you share someone else's experience. And that happens in mice too. I mean, actually, if you give mice MDMA and you let them explore an area, like a just picture like a box where on one side there's a mouse kind of like hanging out. They're sort of like restrained so they can't move, and not like they can move but they can't like explore the rest of the arena. And then on
Hmm.
the other side there's an object. If you give mice MDMA, they'll spend way more time over with the other mouse. Like they actually like to be around other mice more when they're rolling essentially.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. And how do you give them MDMA? Is it in food? How do they get it in the first place?
It's like you'd get like it's a shot basically. It's an injection. It's like you know when you go and
Got
get the
it.
flu vaccine kind of thing.
Yeah, so what are you finding? Why do we tend to love each other so much on MDMA? I mean, and how can we, because it's used in therapy a lot. It used to be used in therapy. Now it's coming back. It's coming back in a big way. So why do we feel so loving and empathetic when we're on MDMA?
Yeah, so that's that question exactly right there is the sort of crux of my research project, and it's not published yet, so I can't really share too much. But I can
Hmm.
talk about what we've already published from the lab, not my work, but another scientist named Boris Heifetz published a
Hmm.
paper in 2019, and basically what he found is that the so okay, let me back up for a second. Let's just talk about what MDMA does. When you take MDMA,
Hmm.
it acts like any other drug where it goes into the brain and it does something, right? Like every drug has a specific mechanism, whether it's acting on dopamine or serotonin or glutamate or whatever it is. MDMA, what it does is it causes a bunch of serotonin and dopamine release. Like it goes to levels that are way beyond what we typically experience. And so it makes sense that either serotonin or dopamine is driving the effect that we're seeing on the social behavior. And what Boris Heifetz found is that the effect can be tied to serotonin and specifically one receptor for serotonin. It's called the serotonin 1B receptor. There's
Hmm.
like 13 or 14 serotonin receptors. But what he found is that if you block that receptor and you give MDMA, then the mice no longer become interested in interacting with each other. So, and now what I'm doing is kind of a similar study, but instead of looking at like how much they interact with each other, I'm looking at how much they sort of share experiences in a way, and in a sense, studying empathy.
Right. So what does it look like when two mice are enjoying an experience together? Like, what does that look like, sharing an experience?
Yeah, it's not quite the same as human social interaction.
Hmm.
Mice having a good time together. Um, sorry, is there a lot of noise in the background? We can.
It's okay. I'll ask you the question again. I think you just got trucks come, garbage trucks come on this day everywhere, it seems.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm in an apartment complex, and there's a gigantic truck like right outside the window. And I just don't know. I'm using my MacBook mic, so I don't know if it's like doing a good job filtering.
it's
Um,
okay. I'll start the question again. So
yeah, sorry.
what does it, no problem. What does it look like when mice share experiences, like as opposed to humans sharing an experience when they're on MDMA?
Yeah, so it's funny. My whole scientific career, I've been studying social interaction. At my PhD, I studied autism, also in mice, and so
Mm,
a lot of my scientific career has been spent just like watching mice interact with each other. And of course, there's like a quantifiable component to it. It's not just me sitting there with like a clipboard, like, and now it's sniffing the other mouse. But pretty much what happens is like they start by going, it's sort of like two dogs interacting actually. Like they go nose to nose, they kind of like check each other out, like they
Hmm.
might rear up and like their front paws are up and they're not like touching each other with their paws, but they're just kind of up and sniffing each other's bodies. And then essentially at some point one of the mice will get like kind of bored, kind of like like happens with dogs, and it'll start running away. And then the other mouse, if it still wants to interact, it'll chase them and it'll sniff its butt and stuff. And then
Hmm.
the other mouse will turn around and be like, what the hell's going on here, buddy? Like, what are you doing? And then they'll kind of like engage a little bit more, and then it can go on like that for a while, where one mouse is kind of driving the interaction and running after the other one, and kind of being like, I want to sniff more, uh, and then they switch roles and stuff. But with MDMA, it's pretty similar, except the only difference is that there's more of it.
Mm.
There's more of this interaction behavior, and what's funny is when a mouse is on MDMA, you can tell because all of their hair stands up. Not like in a way that's like super, super obvious, but you can, like, if I'm looking at two mice, I can tell which one's on MDMA because for some reason it causes what we say a piloerection. It's the hair just like starts to stand up and stick out a little bit more. It's kind of interesting.
What do you think causes that?
I have no idea. It's probably
Mm.
some sort of like the same kind of thing that like when MDMA causes, like you mentioned, like teeth grinding or like sweating. Like it's probably just some sort of like off-target physiological response. Maybe it's caused by dopamine or one of the other downstream signaling mechanisms involved.
Yeah. So when you test on mice, like what's the end game? Like eventually, maybe we test on humans, and we kind of see is MDMA a legitimate source of a therapeutic drug that we can use on humans? Is that the end goal, to find out if it works with humans?
Yeah, definitely. Mouse research is really intended to identify like the molecular mechanisms of things in general,
Mm-hmm.
and like so that could be like what's happening in like multiple sclerosis or Alzheimer's disease or autism spectrum disorder, or in this case, what this drug MDMA is doing. And because mice give us the ability to really dive deep into the like cellular level where we can study things on like a protein level. We can look at like how much of a level or how much of a protein is floating around in this brain cell when something happens, and is that important for a disease or something like that. We can get so deep what we can't do in humans, and ideally, like you said, we will learn something that can then be sort of applied to human beings. And so in this case, there's a real life application. MDMA, of course, causes these like great, strong feelings of social connection that can be really useful. For example, for things like PTSD or like assisting therapy,
Mm-hmm.
but or maybe even in the context of some conditions that are involve or that affect like social behavior, like autism spectrum disorder. But you don't want to necessarily be rolling when you're taking a medication daily, right? Or even
Right.
if you take it ever, because there's also these, like I mentioned, there's these physiological things like teeth grinding and sweating that, you can dehydrate, there's problems. So what we're trying to figure out is like, when you take MDMA, are there pieces of the drug, not actually the drug, but are there pieces of what's happening in the brain that we can like identify as the key like functional component that drives that social connection,
Mm.
but doesn't have any of the other things, like it doesn't have the addictive liability, doesn't have the sweating, doesn't have the dehydration, all those things. And we can just then create drugs that target that specific mechanism so that it's having the benefits of MDMA without having all like the negatives and the downsides of MDMA,
Mm.
and like the intense sort of uh, psychoactive experience. And
Yeah, that
that type
sounds.
of research is also being done for like psilocybin and things like that. We're trying to figure out like which parts are the important like therapeutic parts, and can we like pull them out and use what we learn to then create human trials to study this stuff in human beings.
Yeah, I mean that sounds amazing, and let me know when you've finished.
Yeah, yeah.
Because obvious. That's my next question. Like, do you notice that the mice get agitated as they come off the drug? Are they? They do they have a come down?
That's a good question. Not that I notice.
Hmm.
But it's also hard to say because they're mice, right? And so we don't really
Yeah.
know. There are ways you can test, like for example, I've done this experiment myself. If you give a mouse MDMA and then like an hour later you test their like pain sensitivity, like how sensitive they are. If you like literally, if you just kind of like picture someone like poking your foot with like a single bristle of a toothbrush, where it
Uh huh.
doesn't hurt, But like,
Right.
let's say if you had a blister on your toe, you'd be like, all right, you know, and eventually you'd pull away because it does start to hurt. If a mouse is like experiencing some level of pain or something, they become more sensitive to like mechanical, like a physical touch like that. And that could potentially be used as an indicator of like whether the mouse feels bad. And the MDMA doesn't have any effect on that. Like they're totally normal after. They also don't lose weight. That's another thing people study in mice is if you give a drug and they lose weight, it's like they're not eating because they feel sick. They don't lose weight with MDMA. So they seem to tolerate it well. And every single day though, like I look at these mice and I'm like, man, I just wish I could be in your head and just see like this huge like gloved hand comes in and picks you up and it's like you're on MDMA. Like I can't even imagine what it's like for the mouse. But we're trying to understand. I mean, we have to do some level of like putting ourselves in their mind to think about things from their view because we have to design these like behavioral experiments to really
Yeah.
get at like how they're feeling and what they're thinking.
Is there something that, like, obviously, so their serotonin rises and their dopamine rises when they're on MDMA, and we can stop talking about the mice. That's what it does to us too. And so, does it deplete? Like, is there only so often that you can really do this with mice so that it is effective, or that it is the most effective? Like, does the serotonin and dopamine deplete to a really bad level if it's done too much? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it. I would say yes. So it's a very strong, like sort of like a challenge, we might say, to the system, really to the brain. It's like you are essentially what these drugs are doing is they're sort of just like making the cell just like profusely keep on dumping and not like reabsorbing these neurotransmitters, dopamine and
Mm,
serotonin. So it's just like it's kind of like if you think about it in like a broader sense, it's like imagine if you took a pill that just made your body sweat. And like instead of, but like think about the sweat as like serotonin. Like eventually, after a while, like you'd become dehydrated for sure.
yeah. Hmm.
And because it's like just totally turning off the system that would stop your body from sweating. That's pretty much what's happening. It's stopping your brain cells from like not releasing these chemicals. So there's definitely like a liability for a short-term depletion like right after the experience like that's and you know I think a lot of people feel really bad when they come down uh,
Hmm.
from doing these drugs but yeah I mean long term that's an open question I think whether like if you did MDMA once a week for a year like would it and then you stopped like would it mess up your systems long term um I would say that that's probably not a good idea. And also, again, you know, another reason why it's important for us to not like just give MDMA as a treatment, but we're trying to figure out if there's other ways that can like extract information from how they work, you know, and design different drugs.
Yeah, yeah. So what's going on with psilocybin? Are you aware of what's going on with that research right now?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. So, um, it's such a hot topic right now, like all the psychedelics. And it's so
Hmm.
interesting because it seemed like a few years ago it started picking up where people were starting to talk about this and people were like, is it legit? Like, is it, you know, is this like some weird corner of science that it's like not actually scientists or something? But it has grown to the point where it is like, maybe it's just because I do this research, but it seems like it's like a focus of science right now. It's absolutely a hot topic, not
Yep.
only in like the media, but within science. There's tons of research labs exploring psychedelics. There are like from mechanistic levels to like clinical trials, you know, from like
Hmm.
zebrafish and fruit flies all the way to human beings, you know. And there's tons of funding in this area. It's you know it has kind of seems to have passed this threshold of being like is it real to like no it's real like we're studying this stuff
Yep.
and yeah and psilocybin is being studied for a bunch of conditions you know and some of them are having stronger evidence than others but I know that it's being studied for like depression treatment resistant depression
Hmm.
anxiety even addiction you know like so if you want to stop using a drug um, and yeah, it's pretty remarkable. But there's still so much to figure out. But what it looks like right now is that you know there's pretty remarkable evidence that it can be very effective for a range of conditions. And I do think there is, of course, a limit on how effective it can be in terms of like there are certain conditions that it will be effective for, and there are certain conditions that it won't be effective for. I have heard people say, "I think it can treat everything," and I don't think that's true. I think
Hmm.
there's of course limitations, you know, and we're going to figure those things out. But right now, the focus is really what the hell is it doing? You know, like
Yep.
how is it exactly working? And we know how it works. Like I said, we MDMA causes serotonin and dopamine release. Like we know the mechanism of the drug. The same is true for psilocybin. We also know how things like ketamine, LSD, DMT, like all these drugs, we know exactly how they work. We just don't
Mm.
know how they are therapeutic. You know what I mean? And so that's what we're
Yes.
trying to figure out.
So does psilocybin work the same way with serotonin and dopamine?
Yeah, so I'm just going to do this for your listeners because I feel like everyone's
Please.
always wondering about this. I'm going to give a breakdown real quick of just like all the psychedelics and what they do so
Oh,
that like we
please.
can, yeah, because I feel like this is like hard to find on the internet and, let's just throw it out there. So, okay, MDMA, which we've been talking about, is in sort of a class of its own. It's actually pretty structurally similar to methamphetamine. So it's
Hmm.
actually 3,4-methylene dioxymethamphetamine. And so methamphetamine also causes a bunch of dopamine release. And so they're very similar in that way. MDMA is different in that it causes also the serotonin release. So you can
Hmm.
kind of think of those two in like a class of their own off to the side. And I don't even know if I'd actually class them together. Then we have what we call the classical psychedelics, which are psilocybin, LSD, and DMT. And all three of these act on this one serotonin receptor, the serotonin 2A receptor. So you can think of like two um, cells with a little conjunction where they connect. This is called a synapse.
Hmm.
And from one side, serotonin is being released. On the other side, there's a bunch of receptors where serotonin binds, and then that causes the receiving cell to get some sort of message and some downstream signaling stuff happens. So, but basically, you have a sender and a recipient. So, what MDMA does is it causes a bunch of release so that there's more serotonin being transferred from the receiving cell to the, or I'm sorry, from the sending cell to the receiving cell. So there's just
Hmm.
more serotonin from like a presynaptic, we would say, mechanism. What these other drugs like psilocybin, LSD, DMT do is they actually come in and forget about the first part, forget about the presynaptic side where it's being sent. They go straight to the receiving side and actually just bind the receptor directly. So it's a different type of mechanism, but they're acting on the same system overall, which is serotonin. So they come
Hmm.
in and they bind this serotonin 2A receptor. And then what happens is, you know, the Lord's knowledge. It's like there's a lot happening, and what we know is that it causes a lot of plasticity. That's kind of something that people think is key, but all we know for sure is that like it's binding to 2A, the serotonin 2A receptor, and then whatever else happens beyond that is kind of a mystery. Okay, so we got those three, and then sorry if you don't mind, let's throw in ketamine,
Yeah, let's go.
because so ketamine I'm not going to get too deep into the mechanism because it's very complicated actually, but ketamine is what we call an NMDA receptor antagonist, which means there's a total separate system in the brain that's like serotonin, but it's called glutamate. So it works the same. There's neurotransmitters released from one cell, binds a receptor.
Hmm.
And glutamate is a very different type of neurotransmitter. It's very involved in like learning and cognition and all this stuff. And it binds to a few different receptors. One of them is the NMDA receptor. And so what ketamine does is it actually blocks that receptor. And through a very convoluted mechanism involving multiple different cell types and all this stuff, um, it actually ends up causing increased glutamate to be released.
Hmm.
And that also drives a bunch of neuroplasticity. And when I say neuroplasticity, I mean uh, synapses, those connections between cells, those are changing. There's new ones forming, and they're just sort of adapting. And you can kind of think of like the tiny little microstructures within your brain, just sort of like having however long of an experience the drug is taking, in a couple hours, to just sort of like explore new connections between cells, and everything's just becoming very like plastic, if you will, and very like fluid. And then once
Yes.
the drug wears off, things kind of like resolidify.
That's what I was going to say about psilocybin in particular was that you have an ability to see the world differently, if only for a few hours, but that experience changes the way that you see the world on can change the way you see the world ongoing. It's not just for a few
Mm-hmm.
hours. And I feel like I don't really know ketamine very well, but it's a similar thing that's happening. We're almost trying to go, can we change the way that you view the world? If only for a few hours, but maybe ongoing. And that's what you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about, right? That elasticity.
Yeah, plasticity. Yeah, totally.
Plasticity.
So and you've hit on a great point that's really important for people to know, is that like the I mentioned that we're still trying to figure out like how these drugs work. Like we know what they do, but we don't know how they're therapeutic.
Mhm.
One theory about all of this stuff with ketamine, psilocybin, these some people call them plastogens. They induce plasticity. But one theory is that you're taking this drug, it's opening up your mind to all types of new possibilities. I mean, it's literally creating new connections between cells, which is opening you to new ways of thinking.
Mhm.
And when you pair that great sense of plasticity and change with a very therapeutic environment where you're sitting with a therapist and you're talking about like your deepest emotions, your traumas you've experienced, you're getting to the root of things that irritate you and sort of upset you and drive negative mood on a daily basis. If you can use that opportunity to reshape the way you're thinking about those things,
Mm.
it may literally be a functional physical change in your brain that allows you to then reshape how you view trauma and these things that make you sad,
Yes.
that you can start to say, well, you know what, I actually you know have a different view on this, and it's really not that bad, and maybe I could just try this. And it just opens you to new possibilities. And so when we become very rigid in our thinking, and we have these hard set beliefs maybe about ourselves, maybe we have negative beliefs about ourselves, maybe we have some traumatic memory from the past, these can be opportunities to explore those and embrace them and change them a bit in ways that could be healthier long term. So what I'm really getting at is that there's reason to believe, and I am of the belief, that the interaction with the therapist is very important, and you won't necessarily be able to cure your depression by taking psilocybin at Lollapalooza. It's got to be like a clinical setting. I think that's what's happening, at least.
Yeah, totally. And now, are you studying the ways in which MDMA can deplete certain minerals throughout the body? As we said, dehydration. Does it deplete other mineral? So dehydration would be just like electrolytes within the body would deplete. Anything else like choline or anything like that we can be aware of, like if you are if you were to take any of these drugs, that it depletes certain minerals that you can take in order to replenish the brain and the body?
It's interesting. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as far as I know, so we're not studying that.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as I know, it's funny. There's the dehydration is really a critical piece of it, and I don't think there are any. I mean, there may be some like loss of certain nutrients and things like through the sweating and through the dehydration, but
Mm-hmm.
I think if and just to say cautiously, I am a scientist. I do not endorse recreational use of drugs, but if anyone were at risk of dehydration or using these drugs and worried, hydrating is really key.
Mm-hmm.
Just there's actually studies that have shown, and I hope I'm not misquoting this. So, but I'm fairly certain that there are studies that have shown that if you give someone MDMA in a laboratory setting and maintain hydration, they actually don't have any negative like come down. Like they don't feel like shit after. Basically, so it's really important to hydrate.
Mm-hmm.
And from that study, we might even be able to assume that if you do hydrate properly, then you might not feel awful afterwards, like like you actually mentioned at the beginning. And that's kind of an open question too, it seems, is like, is that really true? Can we replicate that finding? Is it really just that dehydration is all? But
Yeah.
there's likely to be some component of serotonin, dopamine deprivation, and whether you could take like a supplement afterwards to sort of restore serotonin or dopamine, I'm a little skeptical. I mean, I don't think there's any research on that, although if there's not, it might be worth checking out.
Like a 5-HTP, for instance.
Yeah, something along those lines. I mean, I'm not really sure about the like blood-brain barrier permeability of some of these things and how they get like broken down and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And certain, every supplement has kind of a different profile like that. Like you could take it and then, it ends up never even reaching your brain, or maybe it goes directly into the brain. So
Yeah.
um, I can't have any good advice on that, unfortunately.
Yeah, no worries. So, what are you most hopeful about within these drugs that have mostly been classed as recreational because they've all been made illegal? What do you think is the most hopeful for the future of therapy that will be used? Do you think in 10 years that might just be like the norm is sitting down with a therapist and taking whatever? What do you think?
Yeah, I think being realistic, um, right now, if you have depression, the way you go about treating it is you go see a psychiatrist. They prescribe you with SSRIs.
Mm-hmm.
You take SSRIs. They take a few weeks to start working. You have continued therapy sessions, and one theory about how SSRIs are working is kind of through the same mechanism of inducing plasticity, but it's a much slower, much more gradual, and much less intense sort of process and form of plasticity. So basically, one theory is that the whole goal of psychotherapy and SSRIs is to induce plasticity and then take advantage of that through therapy sessions over the course of maybe weeks or months or years. The way I see it is, if this theory of plasticity is really true and key for psychedelics, then we could be able to potentially replace weeks or months or years of therapy with one or a couple sessions and have the same effects. And so I think I'm most excited about the idea of of just being able.
Hi,
That's
Chaplain.
all right, no worries.
That's my beautiful son. Bye.
Hi, Chaplain. Yeah, I'm just excited about the idea of being able to compress the timeline, which is super important for someone with treatment-resistant depression. I mean, suicidality is a component there, and something to consider. And for someone who's really struggling with their mental health and they're searching for answers, and they have to wait 6, 8, 12 weeks for any type of result. I mean, that's what makes me excited, is that it provides a short-term intervention, or it may provide a short-term intervention that can exceed what we can do right now with traditional psychiatric approaches.
Yeah. So something I did want to talk to you about later in the show, but we can talk about it now, is SSRIs and depression. There was recently controversy over this, about the way that SSRIs work, and there was a lot of "I told you so's," and people were playing old videos of Tom Cruise saying that SSRIs are bad because of his Scientology is obviously against any of that type of thing. Could you explain that controversy and maybe talk to us about the truth?
Yeah, I would love to, and it'll actually fit beautifully into what we've already been talking about, because it touches on a lot of the same topics. So before I get into this, let me just preface by saying SSRIs do not work for everyone. I forget what the rates are. Maybe it has like a 30 or 33% remission rate or something along those lines. But it's not a guarantee if you take SSRIs that you're going to have any improvement in your depression. And I think when we get into this conversation, it's very easy for people to look at me and say, "Oh, he's a scientist. He's endorsing SSRIs. He obviously is paid by Big Pharma." None of that. I am a scientist. I am not paid by Big Pharma at all. Trust me, you should see my salary. It's horrendous. But there's no input from Big Pharma.
Yeah,
just good old Stanford University. But
and I wish that Big Pharma would sponsor the Zaddy Zone, because I'm open to it, baby. Somebody got to see my bank account. It's sad. Someone from Big Pharma, please sponsor us.
If you're listening, Zaddy Zone is open to Big Pharma support. But yeah, I just wanted to preface that, because what I am about to say is basically going to support SSRIs. But I'm just telling you, this is 100% truth, honest opinion, unbiased. So what happened was that there's this paper that came out that they looked at all of the studies going back to like the 70s or beyond, maybe even the 50s, on serotonin and depression. And what they found was that when you combine all of the evidence and look at it kind of as a whole, there's really not any strong evidence that low serotonin causes depression. And that was a big deal. And it really struck the media hard. What's funny is that, like, personally, I already knew that. And I think a lot of scientists already knew that, because if any scientist had ever done a literature review on their own, they would have seen the exact same thing. And it's funny, because I actually made a video for social media about the neuroscience of depression. And I was like, where's all the evidence for low serotonin? I thought there was like a low serotonin thing going on. And it's just, there is really no evidence. And so the whole like controversy here is that SSRIs, what they do is they boost serotonin. And so a long time ago, SSRI or big pharma companies decided to simplify the messaging process and say depression is low serotonin. And so by boosting serotonin, you can improve your depression. And there was some evidence at the time when that messaging was really rolled out. There was some evidence to indicate that low serotonin could be a factor. For example, there's a classic paper where they looked in the brains of people who had died by suicide, and they found way lower levels of serotonin. And so they thought, oh, maybe there's a factor here. And there was some other evidence too, but when this paper came out, everyone said, wait a minute, I thought depression was a chemical imbalance, low serotonin. We've been lied to. We've been, strung along by Big Pharma for all these years. These SSRIs are garbage. They don't work. And it even got to the point where, I know this has political implications, but I'm going to point to Tucker Carlson, because he has the biggest show in the world, as far as I'm less aware.
Yeah.
And he put out a segment where he was like, basically saying this new paper came out and now we know SSRIs are not effective and they've been lying to us and they don't treat depression and they don't do what we thought they did.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with all of this is that the evidence for SSRIs still exists. SSRIs are still known as the most effective treatment of depression so far. Psychedelics might change that, but so far that's all we got.
Yep.
And like I said, it's not great. It doesn't work for everyone at all by far, but it is the leading treatment. And this finding coming out showing that low serotonin is not the factor doesn't change anything about the efficacy of SSRIs as a treatment. What it does do is it shows us that boosting serotonin isn't like the key thing in that. Okay, so the chemical imbalance messaging implies that it's a very simple thing. We have low serotonin, boosting it fixes everything.
Right.
But the thing is, it could be a number of things. I mean, I've already talked on this podcast about NMDA receptors, dopamine, glutamate.
Mhm.
There's also GABA. There's all these other neurotransmitters in the brain, all these systems that are always interacting, and they interact with one another. And so what may be the case is that it's not that depression is caused by low serotonin, but by boosting serotonin, you have some other downstream effect that then allows for the alleviation of the symptoms.
Mhm.
And one key potential thing that could be happening there is, as I already alluded to before, serotonin is known to induce plasticity. And so it may be that, you can have perfectly normal levels of serotonin, but be depressed. And when you increase the level of serotonin in your brain, you induce plasticity, and it allows you to kind of become more flexible in your thinking and reevaluate some of these sort of negative thoughts and percepts.
Yeah.
So there's an entirely feasible mechanism for SSRIs to still work without requiring low serotonin. And so I was really frustrated watching this and seeing it all unfold and seeing people saying, I'm going to stop my serotonin, or I'm going to stop my SSRIs. They don't work. They don't help. And that's really concerning, because one of the unfortunate side effects of SSRIs is that if you stop taking them immediately, you can have very severe side effects. And I've seen it personally with people close to me. And they're really like emotional side effects where you can become super irritable, super emotional. And, it really scared me when I saw the number one show in the world saying, don't take SSRIs. They're not useful, because I used to study suicide, and, the amount of suicide deaths that could have been induced by messaging like that is, in my mind, concerning and staggering. And, so it just really worried me. And so I put out a couple of videos. I actually wrote an article on it as well. Not a peer-reviewed scientific article. It's published in this magazine, Open Mind, basically sharing everything I just did now. But, it's just, this is the way media works. This is why it's important for scientists to be out there talking and sharing, because frankly, this also could have been avoided if someone like me, or, Andrew Huberman, or another, neuroscientist had come out and talked about this before the article came out and said, hey, by the way, low serotonin is not really the thing. The impact probably would have been a lot different.
Right. Because so let me just clarify. It's not that it's just low serotonin that causes depression. There's some downstream effect of serotonin on other parts of the brain that affects the symptoms. It's not just serotonin. And the paper simplified it, or just said it's not actually serotonin. So everyone was like, oh, SSRIs aren't effective. It's actually like they are effective sometimes, and it's because of a downstream effect of serotonin. It's not just serotonin, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So there's basically, the treatment can be working. The treatment is definitely working through serotonin, but whether the serotonin itself is important or something else happening downstream, that's the question.
Yeah.
But on the the causal side, there's something happening in the brain. We don't know what. We're still trying to figure out what causes depression. But the paper showed that it wasn't serotonin, and so there's something else. Again, still figuring it out. But that doesn't necessarily rule out using serotonin as a form of treatment.
Yeah. It's
because of what you said, because of the downstream stuff.
It sounds like a conversation of nuance, and nuance is lost today. No one has nuance. I think somebody once said to me that fascism is a lack of nuance, or fascism is a loss of nuance. And I always think about that. I still don't know what it means, but I think about it a lot.
I'll be thinking about that too.
Yeah, right. So interesting. I'm interested in what you think about this, because I had a guy on my podcast named Dr. Chris Palmer, who said that He said that mental issues are metabolic issues of the brain. So when you have a metabolism issue, that is what's affecting mental health. And he said over the last few years, obviously we've seen a rise in metabolic issues, chronic diseases, obesity, etc., and we've also seen a rise in mental health problems. And those two things are aligned and correlated. What do you think about that?
So I'm going to once again give a very nuanced answer, and just a piece of information for the audience to keep in mind. The the more reluctant a scientist is to say this is the cause, this is the thing, generally the more nuanced they are, the the more scientific I would say they are. Like and that's because like the way science works, like you might have a theory and you might run an experiment, and the experiment can support your hypothesis,
Mm-hmm.
but then you still can't be sure that there's something else happening. You can get a result that supports your idea, but you can never truly rule out everything. But we can get closer and closer with more experiments.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is it's really tough to get there, and so it's really tough for scientists to say like for sure we absolutely know this is the thing. So in this case, to this question, my honest, genuine impression is that it's entirely likely, and it probably is a factor. But I think, as a person who studies mental health, studies psychiatric illness, there are, I know for a fact, hundreds, maybe thousands of different sort of causes of, uh, disturbances, if you will, to well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not ruling that out. This
Yep.
this is not a no, it's a probably, but it's definitely not like the only thing. And that's no hate to Chris Palmer at all, by the way, just saying. um
Yeah.
but I know very little about that topic specifically. And but yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Any sort of metabolic disturbance in brains, if the brain cells aren't able to properly, utilize the sugar and oxygen and stuff that's being provided to them, then that's going to induce a loss of function or some problem to those brain cells, which will definitely affect how you feel and how you can think and everything.
Yeah. So have you done any study about the effects of sleep and mental health?
I haven't. Well, actually, okay, I haven't personally. At one time, I actually on TikTok did a survey where I asked people how much they were sleeping and how much how they were feeling and stuff. And I actually, in my sample of TikTok users, I replicated what is very well known, that people who get more sleep generally feel better and have their lower likelihood of feeling depressed,
Mm-hmm.
improved mood, and generally just feeling great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I saw yesterday somebody sent me what's his name, the sleep guy. He calls himself the sleep. Gosh, what's his name? This he's called this. What's his the sleep royalty or something? He was on Huberman. He's like the sleep. He's a sleep freak. Anyway,
Oh, okay.
he was saying that just 1 hour more of sleep, if women are to get one more hour of sleep, their libido goes up 14%. Of course, the comments
Hmm.
were ragingly angry. Don't tell women what to do, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, I think that's just an interesting fact that it's like, if you were to just get one more hour of sleep, your well being would be better. You'd want to, you'd obviously, like, I see sex as like a libido and sex is a good, way of gauging, do you have extra energy for more things?
Hmm.
Because you could just have enough energy to just get the bare minimum done. Sex is extra. Sex is like, oh, I really like have to have more energy in order to want to get that done. Libido and sex drive is all about that. And so I was like, that's fascinating to me. 14% rise in libido is pretty good.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I mean, it's consistent with my feelings about sleep in general. I mean, I almost evangelically advocate for people to get more sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really think it's important. Personally, I get 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night. I've been going to bed and waking up at the same time every single day for the last, I don't know, 20 years.
Wow.
And even weekends, and I mean, some, of course there's exceptions, right? Like I'm out drinking, sometimes it happens. I'm at a wedding,
Yep. Yep.
things happen. But yeah, and I always try to immediately recalibrate my sleep schedule. It's incredibly important, and it has so many effects. I mean, I you might struggle to find some biological thing that sleep doesn't touch.
Right.
Sleep is important for everything, and one of the critical ones is mental health. It's absolutely critical for maintaining a positive mood, and it extends so far across our experience. So, how many hours of sleep do you get a night, Luke?
I go to sleep at around 9:30 every night, and I wake up at 6:37 most mornings. So
Uh,
around 8, and maybe even
I
pushing to 9.
Yeah, I am very proud of you right now, Luke. That is a nice schedule. That
Al-
is really good. It's
Also,
actually less than I get,
I have
or
two
more than I get.
kids, and one of them is under a year old. So sometimes there are sleep disturbances via that. And my thing is, I just, as soon as like their sense, like, as soon as there's something going wrong with him, because you don't, when you're sleep training, which is what we're doing, you leave them alone. You kind of are trying to teach them, if you're crying, you can self soothe. We're not always going to come in, so that they can
Mhm.
learn to go back to sleep themselves. So what I do is I immediately remove myself and go to the couch, and I try and get a good night's sleep there. But I'm always looking for that 8 hours, because I can tell mood wise when I haven't got enough sleep. I can also tell via my hunger
Mhm.
signals when I get less sleep. I want to eat and I'm hungry all day. And I think that's one of
Yep.
the stark reminders that I haven't got enough sleep, if I'm always hungry. Do you find that too?
Yep. Yeah, and that's scientifically proven. Sleep also has a critical component or a critical hand, I guess, in regulating like appetite. And yeah, and there's definitely a correlation between getting less sleep and increased likelihood for obesity for sure.
Wow. Wow. Fascinating.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, how many hours did you say? What time do you go to sleep and what time do you wake up? What's your deal?
I usually try to be asleep by 10:30.
Mm-hmm.
There is a range. And usually I try to wake up by 7, but lately my dog has been ringing the bell for me at 6 a.m. And so it's brutal. And I live in an apartment complex where I'm on the second floor. So like I got to wake up at 6 a.m., immediately throw the covers off, get out of bed, put her on the harness and walk her around outside until she goes to the bathroom. So every morning, my morning starts like that. It's one of the worst things in my life right now. But that says a lot about my life. It's pretty good.
Yeah, if that's
But
bad, if that's the worst thing, that's pretty good. Tell me about
yeah,
the effect of sleep on athletic performance. Is there anything you know about that?
yeah, so it's like I said, there's hardly anything that sleep doesn't touch.
Yeah.
Athletic performance is an interesting one. I mean, I think if you're getting like 5 hours of sleep a night, and you can change that to 8 hours of sleep a night, I can almost guarantee you're going to have an improvement in athletic performance, among other things, of course, among appetite, mood, energy levels, all sorts of things, cognition, focus, so many things. But the studies that have been done, that at least the ones I've seen on sleep and athletic performance, have looked at sort of like the upper end of that, where if you're already getting enough sleep and then you extend that. So there's one study, I made a TikTok video about it once, where they took Stanford basketball players. This is from like 2011 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked them to get as much sleep as they possibly could every single night for like 5 to 7 weeks. And so they went from like, I don't know, 7.5 or 8 hours on average up to like 10.5 hours per night. And they found that over the course of that 5 to 7 week period, they had improved reaction times, improved sprint times, and they even got a little bit better at shooting free throws. And it's like, there is a potential problem here with the study in that, and for any aspiring scientists out there, never do this. There's no control group.
Mm.
So it's easy. You could look and say, well, if they were shooting free throws every day to test their accuracy and running sprints every day to test their speed, that over the course of 5 to 7 weeks, it was just a training effect that they just got better, which is why it would have been great to have a control group that didn't extend their sleep to see if they stayed
Right.
the same. But there's also other studies, like there's one where they they had people get sleep deprived for one night, I believe, and then the following morning they let them take a 30-minute nap, and after the 30-minute nap, their reaction times were
Mm.
improved, which makes sense. I mean, it's like, sleep is rest for
Yep.
the brain, and it allows you to just perform better, and so that things like reaction time, and the sprinting is an interesting one, because you would think that I tend to think about sleep as a process for the brain, but the sprinting sort of implies that it's also a therapeutic process for the
Yeah.
body, because of course the brain has a kind of top down control over sprinting, but like, can you really get faster just because your brain is working better? Of course there has to be some body wide effect
Yeah.
there, but the reaction time is definitely brain.
Yeah, totally. It's funny. I do a thing called a Carol bike. It's just over here. It looks like a Peloton, but it's two 20-second sprints within 5 minutes. And the idea is that it over 8 weeks it can improve your VO2 max by 12%. Pretty crazy claim. So 2 20-second sprints, but it's so interesting to note when I know that I can go as hard as I possibly can, and when my body is just like, it's not happening today. Like, you're not doing your best today.
Mm.
And one thing I've noticed is too early in the morning, aka if I haven't really fueled before, if there's no glycogen in the muscles, for instance, I think that could be related. But it's so interesting to know when your body is ready to go and when it's not. In the afternoon, I'm much, much more likely to crush it than in the morning. Something about
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, I've anecdotally experienced that myself. I wake up and go to the gym, and I'm like gonna start my day on the right foot, and then I try lifting weights, and my body's just like pathetic. Like I can't
Yeah.
even there's no muscle tone. I'm like still like in sleep
Yeah.
paralysis, basically. Like it's and I don't know what the explanation is for that, but definitely something I've experienced, and I do feel energized after, though, once I kind of power through it.
Me too. But I've spoken to a few sports dietitians who are like, pre-training fuel is vital. Like eating before you work out. It's like, working out fasted is okay, but if you want better performance, you have to eat before you work out.
Yeah, there's this new thing that I keep seeing a lot about, and it's like a growing market. It seems like ketone
Yeah.
supplements. Where have you
I
heard about
had my
this?
first ketone shot yesterday, ketone IQ or something. I had yesterday for the first time, and I kind of had a. Could you tell me about this? Because it almost felt like a shot of coffee to me. I was almost like, as soon as I drank the whole thing at once, and I was like, "Am I kind of having a bit of a panic?" Like, I just felt this surge of energy that I wasn't ready for. I just thought it would be like MCT oil or something. What is it?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of like confusion about ketones, and like when I first heard about it, I'm like, okay, so wait, what is it? Like you take it and then you like enter keto? Like is it
Right.
a like ketogenic diet replacement or something? But it's not. I guess that the theory behind it is that ketones can be used as fuel. Like if you go into
Mhm.
ketosis through a keto diet, then your body starts using ketones as fuel, and they're very effective source of fuel for the
Mhm.
brain. And so the theory is if you take a ketone shot that contains a lot of ketones, then it will your brain will basically start using it immediately, and it will serve as sort of like a pick me
Yeah.
up in a way. Whether it will, I think personally, my big question, and I have talked to the people at Ketone IQ about this too, is in the absence of energy, it makes sense, right? You had a long day, you're burnt out, you're tired, your blood sugar is low. You take a shot of ketones, and it kind of serves as like an immediate, just like pick me up for the body. It restores function physiologically by providing
Yeah.
fuel. But the question really is like in the absence of a deficit, right? When you're in a normal
Yeah.
health, right? You're having a good day, and it's funny because like if you're having a solid day and you drink a cup of coffee, you're already alert. You will kind of feel like an enhancement,
Yes.
right? Like you'll feel like, and it's not necessarily a good enhancement. Like you might be feeling like wired
Bit of a
and
panic.
jittery.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, but the mechanism is different between coffee and ketones. But the question is, so if you drink ketones, is there an enhancement, or does it just kind of get like shuttled into the rest of the fuel and just like And I have tried ketone supplements, like you said, the shots, and I've experienced a similar thing where, I took it and I kind of felt like it almost felt like my vision was just like blurred, like my eyes were kind of like moving
Mm.
a lot, and like they call them saccades, where your eyes like move
Hmm.
between things. It was almost like that, where like I was just kind of like I didn't feel more energetic, but it was almost like my physiology was like driven harder.
Yeah.
But so the reason I bring all this up is because the part of the theory is you could use it as a pre-workout supplement to provide that
Right. So
fuel, or
I
post-workout.
think anybody listening, I think for movement, it's probably great. I was in a meeting when I took it, and I was like, I have to stand up and move around, and I had to. I literally started getting up and getting water from the cooler so that I could move, because I was like, seated just doesn't seem right for this ketone stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is a very new space, and I've seen a couple of brands in there, coming out with these products, and and I do want to say, like, I've no sponsorships or anything like that with ketones, and this is my first time really talking publicly about my
Once
thoughts on it.
again, we're open
But yeah, it's
to sponsorship. Any
sponsorship. You're gonna be sponsored by Ketone IQ and Johnson and Johnson
I
by the
want
end of this.
SSRIs, baby. That's big money. So could you tell me a little bit about I just briefly want to touch on this. We don't have much longer, but placebo is something that has been blowing my mind lately, just thinking about it as a non-scientist. So sometimes in a control group, or they'll have a placebo pill that they'll give people that isn't actually effective, but people feel the effects
Mhm.
via placebo. Could you explain this to me?
I wish science had an explanation, but it's so fascinating. I mean, yeah. So I'll give an example of something that will blow your mind. But yes. So just to preface all this, you're absolutely right. I mean, the power of placebo is not to be underestimated. What I think, I don't want to give any hard numbers because I don't want to say anything that's wrong. But my understanding is that like in these like SSRI trials or something like that, right? Like when you're testing a drug, you always need to include a placebo because people in the placebo group will always show like a treatment
Mm,
effect, like various conditions. um it's remarkable, like as far I believe even in the cases of like chronic pain and things like that you would think are not really flexible to just sort of like snapping a finger and getting better, people in placebo groups always, like some portion, maybe between like 10 and 15% of people show like true remission
wow.
rates from these conditions. And not everything, I don't want to like something like multiple sclerosis, like no, that's but especially with like depression, anxiety, things like that. So but what's exactly happening is a mystery, but here's an interesting example. So to I can get into the longer story if you want, but to summarize it, there was a study where they found that placebo painkillers actually induce pain relief. People actually experience less pain after being given a pill than that's sugar pill, and they're told that it's like a
Mm,
painkiller, right? They're like, oh, we're testing this new painkiller, and then if you actually like zap their hand with like an electric shock, they'll actually report it as being less painful. So there will be a true like relief
yeah.
of pain. And so there was a study that tried to figure out how this was happening. And so they went into they didn't go into the brain. What they did is they gave these people a true pill that was actually doing something in the brain along with the placebo. And what the other pill was doing was blocking these receptors in the brain that are like involved in pain relief. So when you take morphine or like any of these are opioids, right, or heroin, um, they act on this opioid system in the brain, and they're like morphine is like the most robust painkiller you can get because it binds these receptors that cause extreme pain relief. So these are opioid receptors that naturally exist in the
Hmm.
brain. What they did was they blocked those receptors. So they gave a placebo pain pill, and then they gave the blocker of the opioids, and they could block the effect of the placebo, which would suggest that when you give people a placebo painkiller, something happens in the brain where the naturally existing pain relief systems somehow like activate themselves.
So wait, the thing that, essentially they were saying they were taking away the body's ability. They were actually giving the body the ability to feel pain again, and the placebo. Is that right?
Yeah, so they were blocking the systems that are involved in pain relief.
Right.
So yeah, like you could think about it as this: like if you gave someone
Uh huh.
morphine and then you zap their hand, they would report it as being less
Yes.
painful because morphine is going in and binding on these opioid receptors that makes them truly experience less
Yes.
pain, right? But if you give people placebo, they also experience less pain. And what the study showed is that it's through the same mechanism, that if you block those opioid receptors, even though they're not getting morphine or anything like that, uh, to actually activate those
Hmm.
receptors, the placebo was somehow acting through those receptors through, because we have natural, they're called endogenous opioids that are produced in the
Hmm.
brain, naturally released. And so if you prevented those natural opioids from binding to those receptors while you gave the placebo, then it blocked the effect of the placebo. So it's very complicated. It's very difficult to explain. I could use like a whiteboard or something, but essentially what it's saying is that placebo painkillers act through the same mechanism as like real
Right.
painkillers. They act on the same system in the brain without the actual presence of any true substance to bind those receptors.
To me, it would make sense that the placebo would work via the explanation of the doctor or whoever's giving you it, and the way in which they speak about it. Like, are they like we're so excited
Mm-hmm.
about this painkiller? It's been shown to be so effective, and that,
Yeah.
maybe that's an actor's job. Maybe we can, as or a salesman. It's like, listen to this. This thing is amazing. It's going to do this, this, and this. Because when I take supplements, I like to look up all the things that it does so that I mentally know. so that I can try and feel what those things are doing. And that's, I'm actively trying to placebo
Mhm.
myself. And I think that it's the sale. Like you have to sell it and then see if it works.
Yeah, that's absolutely a component. Because I mean, if the thing is, if you gave someone the same exact pill in without saying, okay, you are enrolled in a clinical
Mhm.
trial, we're testing this painkiller. If this would never happen, but if that same person was walking on the street and found the pill on the ground and had no context around what it did, and for whatever reason they picked it up and put it in their mouth
Mhm.
and swallowed it, there's no way it would have pain
Right.
relief effects. It
Yeah.
wouldn't, because it is about the priming of the experience and the expectation. But that's why placebos are included, because the treatment group who actually got the treatment also had the same experience of being provided the pill by a doctor, and there's an explanation. And so, it's not really about the physical pill itself; it's about the experience of going through the clinical trial. And also, there's of course something to say about when someone with depression or anxiety enrolls. They go through the process of deciding to enroll in a clinical
Mm.
trial, and they're put in the placebo group, but they don't know it. And they go and they talk to a doctor, and they sit in an office, and they take a pill. There's something about that process of like probably making this active decision to like get help that also has like some sort of like natural relief, for some people, not all
Yes,
people, a small percentage.
there's a test, or it's a series of questions that can make you fall in love with somebody. It's like 37 questions, and then you stare at each other for 4 minutes in the eye. And I was always like, yeah, but if you want to do that with somebody, then you want to fall in love with them.
Right.
So it's going to work because you want to fall in love with this person. Like if you just start dating someone, like, let's see if this works. It's like, it's probably going to work because you want to be in love with them, right?
Right, right. I mean, forget the questions. If you just stare in the eyes of someone for 4 minutes and tell yourself you want to fall in love with them, it's gonna happen.
Let's go right now. Ben, I want to know about this thing because you go around to fairs or kind of like big rooms of scientists talking, and what you try and push is this idea that we need to get scientific ideas out to the public via social media, because we've got this incredible medium now and this great way to push out information, and people should be putting their studies out into the world. That's right? That's what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that, the way science is currently set up is not ideal for involving the
Mm-hmm.
public
Mm-hmm.
at all. Not even close to ideal. It's probably the exact, if I had to design a system to exclude the public, it's probably what it
Yeah.
would be. There's, you publish, and it's frustrating as a scientist because I can speak from my personal experience. I've had times where I've spent 4 or 5 years working on a project, grinding. Like being a scientist is not easy. Things go wrong. It's really
Mm-hmm.
difficult. Writing up a paper, going through all this work, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on reagents and stuff. And then you finally get to the point where you publish your paper. You're so excited for it to become public knowledge. It comes out in the journal and it gets like 250 views. And it's like, no wonder it gets 250 views, because if the public even wanted to access this, they have
Yep.
to pay for it. There's a paywall there, which
Mm-hmm.
should not exist. And then, even worse, once they do open the paper and sit down with their cup of coffee and they're ready to understand some science, they can't even understand it because it's written in intense jargon. And I just think that it's just unfortunate that so many people want to be uh, involved in science, at least in discussions around science, and they're structurally and sort of systematically excluded from being involved because of all these systems. And I think that I've kind of stumbled into a solution by going on social media and talking about papers, and I have resources on my website and stuff for people to learn. But um, yeah, it's making me realize that like this is really important, and there's a lot of people out there who don't trust science, and I wonder why. Maybe it's because they've been historically completely excluded from the conversations and unable to interact with scientists and interact with the data themselves, and appreciate the value of science and what we can learn from science. So, I just do my best to get out there and spread the information. I also, as you mentioned, I do some like workshops and like kind of educational seminars type of things for universities and scientists and things like that, just sort of promoting the idea of connecting with the public, because I think it's really important. And so with that said, I
Oh
appreciate you
no, of
having me on
course,
for
and I
this.
think that's it's a really noble thing to do, and I think it's really doable for a lot of people. I don't think people really understand. Just like it's really small. It's like take a screenshot of your paper, get on a green screen in TikTok, which has the green screen thing, and talk about it in a way that's under a minute, that's like understandable for a layman, and that's all you have to do. And you can make it as interesting as you
Hmm.
want. You can take pictures of mice and put it in there. I mean, here's an idea for a bigger scale. What? Why not like PubMed Talk, like a whole app where you can go on and scientists are like doing videos. Like it's like you can read the paper, but there's a video there that you can click on, and the scientist is telling you what this is. It's for everyone. It's not just for scientists. It's like okay, if you don't want to read all this, let me just tell you what it is, and tell me, and I will tell you how we did the
Hmm.
experiments, and we'll tell you what we think that the conclusion is, and like if any there are any rebuttals to the ideas, or if we were to do it again, how could it be more effective? Like it's a surely people would want to look at that.
Yeah, I mean, first off, just want to say, absolutely love the idea. And in fact, I'm going to, when this comes out, I'm going to share this clip with my friend who's actually, I can't give away too much, but building an app very much
Wow.
like what you just described. So hopefully, I'm going to message him this and say, hurry up, because now it's out. But but yeah, I agree. I think it'd be great. The only problem with that is that not every scientist is engaging or clear or
Yeah,
interesting to
true.
watch. And that's fine. You could say the same thing
Yep.
about any career, but I think I totally agree. Like, I think it's important for every scientist, maybe not every scientist, but most scientists, to take it upon themselves to do like something. Like now we're starting to see something called like these tweetorials, where scientists will put up a tweet where they're like, "I just published this paper. Here's like 5 or 6 tweets, just
Yeah.
kind of explaining what it is." And like that right there, that's sufficient. Just go out there and just make the information out there so that anybody who follows you or stumbles into your post can gather some level of knowledge from it and say, great, I now understand. I feel a little bit more up to date with the science. I feel a little bit more included in the
Yeah.
scientific discussion. And I feel a little bit more directly engaged with the scientific community, because right now we're totally
I
separate.
love that. And if you follow Dr. Ben, you'll see content just like that where he goes into super interesting science and experiments, also misinformation, calls a few people out. It's very entertaining, and he does a great job of this. So if you're interested in science, you want to know more, please go and follow Dr. Ben. How do we follow you?
Well, you might want to go straight to my website where all the links are. So, if you have TikTok, Instagram, whatever. So my website's just my name, BENREIN.com.
Excellent. But you're on TikTok and you're out there. How many followers you got on TikTok now?
TikTok, I'm a little over
Amazing.
700,000. Instagram, I'm a little over
Great. I mean,
115.
that's
But
good. Not many scientists have over 700,000 followers. That's great.
yeah, well, I appreciate that. And, I just, it makes me feel really just sort of satisfied and happy that I can be out there and connect people with science, because what I've really learned from this experience of being on the internet is just that, like, people really do want to connect with science and they really don't have the ways to. And so I do it all like essentially volunteer, where I'm
Mhm.
taking time away from the lab to make these videos, but there's just like, it's totally worth it, because it does take a while. Each video, even though it's only 60 seconds, could take me 3-4 hours to make. I have to
Yes.
carefully read the paper. I have to think about how I'm presenting it. I have to distill it down and film it, edit it. And but it's totally worth it, because when I post it and people start asking questions and they're like, this is so cool, I want to learn more about this area of science, I'm just like, mission accomplished. This
I
is
love it.
great.
Dr. Ben Rein, thanks so
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me. This has been a lot of fun.